Okay, here we go with another video lecture in philosophy and film. The topic of this lecture is free will. We'll talk about what free will is, we'll look at some challenges to free will, and then we'll talk about Clyde Bruckman's Final Repose, which is a viewing for this topic. One way to define free will is the ability to make your own choices. We like to think we have free will, and there are some reasons to think that free will is important to our conception of human beings, our idea of what we are. We don't like the idea of thinking that we're just a puppet on a string, being made to do what we do by some external forces. So why do we care if we're really free, if we really have free will? Well, there's questions of moral and legal responsibility. We want to say, well, we want to think that somebody should be held responsible for doing something, either in a moral sense or a legal sense. We think, well, they must have done it of their own free will. They weren't forced to do it by some external or internal forces. And then there's the idea of humanity, like the idea of free will is central or possibly essential to our very idea of what it means to be a human being. So now we want to consider three challenges to free will, three different ideas that call into question whether or not we actually do have free will. First of these is the idea of fate or destiny. In ancient Greek mythology, there were three fates who would sow the fate of everyone, including the gods. They would determine who you would turn out to be and how your life would turn out. And really, you had no say-so in the matter. A classic story in Greek mythology is the story of Oedipus, who his father early on receives a prophecy that he tries to overcome, and yet by trying to overcome it, he actually causes the events of this prophecy to take place. You can look at the reading and see what this story is. But it's a classic tale of how fate is inescapable. Your life is planned out from the beginning, even before you're born. It's determined to come out a certain way. Here's some phrases people use sometimes which maybe suggest that they believe in something like fate. They might say, everything happens for a reason, or it's his will, usually meaning God, or it was meant to be. Again, like there was some plan in place that we're just following. And this creates a challenge for free will, because the question is, how can I be really free if my life is determined to come out a certain way no matter what I do? And the story of Odysseus is a character named Tiresias. And Tiresias is a person who can see the future. He's a seer. He's blind, which is interesting. He also appears in the story of Oedipus. Tiresias possesses what is known as foreknowledge. This is the second challenge to the idea of free will. It's a quote from the Bible character, Jeremiah. God says, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations." That the destiny of Jeremiah was determined beforehand that he would be a prophet, and the prophet is able to see the future and to communicate this to people. So this creates a challenge to free will. If God or if some other being knows what we're going to do before we do it, the question is, how can we actually be free? And of course, you see a lot of these people known as prognosticators or fortune tellers who are supposedly able to see the future. And again, the question is, how could you see the future if it hadn't already been written or determined? And the final of the three challenges to free will is physical determinism. Imagine there's a big bang at the beginning of time in the universe. It sets everything into motion. The idea is here that all the particles are created and they keep moving and forming and making different things. There's no choice in the matter. They're just determined by the laws of nature, by physical forces to be whatever they're going to be. They see that, well, there's the beginning of time and space, and then it just keeps going forward, and eventually you have the creation of galaxies and planets, and eventually the creation of our galaxy. And our solar system, and then life itself, which is based in DNA, which is a kind of a program that determines how physical things, how living things are going to turn out. And then we think over millions and billions of years, there's evolution to finally get to human beings. And that this is all determined by the physical forces of nature. And that even our brains are determined by our DNA and by our experience, that we don't have any choice in the matter. Our brains turn out to be the way they are, and our brains determine what we do. So the idea being that everything is predetermined by physical causes, and there is no room for free will in this picture. So you might say we're like one of these dominoes. We don't have a choice in the matter. They just keep falling because of what happens before. So the Big Bang would be like the first domino, on and on, until you get to me talking right now. So to recap the three challenges to free will, there's the idea of fate or destiny. If my life's destined to turn out a certain way, am I truly free? Foreknowledge. If God or anybody else knows what I'm going to do before I do it, am I truly free? The question of physical determinism. If nature is determined by physical forces, am I truly free? I'm not going to answer these challenges, just put them out there and allow you to think about them. So briefly, a couple ways the issue of free will shows up in everyday life. One is the question of insanity and legal responsibility. Here's a definition of legal insanity. Mental illness of such a severe nature that a person cannot distinguish fantasy from reality, cannot conduct his or her affairs due to psychosis, or subject to uncontrollable impulsive behavior. So you might think the last one is when the person has no free will. He or she can't control what they're doing. So we might say, well, you have no free will, so we're not going to hold you responsible. The question is what we mean by this and whether or not people who aren't legally insane are also not in control of their behavior. Another couple places where the question of free will shows up is in thinking about someone's history and character. How is it that what happened to you in the past determines how you behave today? How much influence does your past have on how you are today? Are you conditioned in a certain way to behave a certain way? If so, how free are you to determine your own self? And finally, when we try to profile criminals to predict their behavior, we think that we can look at a certain type of person, a certain history they have, a certain character type, and predict what they're going to do, to predict what kind of crimes they might commit. So again, the question is how much of their behavior is predetermined by physical makeup of their brains and their past history. then here's a quote from the novelist Isaac Singer: "We must believe in free will. We have no choice." So the viewing for this topic is from the television show The X-Files. You can look this up. I won't go into detail about the specifics of the show. This is the tagline from the show that's used quite often. I'll also say that Buddy Holly is important to the story of Clyde Bruckman's Final Repose is the name of the episode. And so if you don't know who Buddy Holly is, you may want to look him up before you check out the viewing. So that concludes this video lecture. Cheers.